Oh, wow. Today, we have shared stories with each other and deepened the bonds of community. As we continue to share our stories and build community together, let's remember that we have choice. Let's remember to ask, which stories do we tell? Which stories do we invite? To which stories do we listen? It's been a hard year. I listen to audiobooks frequently, and over the past year, I have sought relief in listening to stories that I already know. Even some stories that I've listened to more times than I would want to admit, like the entire Harry Potter series or Olivia Jewels and the Overactive Imagination by Helen Fielding. Think Bridget Jones becomes a spy. These have been my safe stories, my comfort stories. But several weeks post vaccination, I feel like I am emerging and I am ready to engage with new stories, ready to engage with more challenging stories. I recently read a new story by naturalist Helen MacDonald from her book Vesper Flights. In the story, Ms. MacDonald has been preparing for a visit from prospective tenants, a couple with an autistic son. As a parent of two autistic children, her story resonates deeply with my life experience. Helen MacDonald writes, as he climbs out of the car, my heart folds and falls, not because he is wearing a stripy red and orange jumper, but because he is grasping as a model sea lion in each hand. I look at his hands. Each of the sea lions has chips of paint missing about its nose, where I suspect the sea lions have interacted with each other. I ask him if he wants to see my parrot. His eyebrows raise and he waits. A brief, wordless okay from his parents, and we ascend the stairs. He counts each step out loud, and we stop in front of the cage. The bird and the boy stare at each other. They love each other. The bird loves the boy because he is entirely full of joyous, manifest amazement. The boy just loves the bird, and the bird does that kind of fluffed little flirting twitch of his head, and the boy does it back. And soon the bird and the boy are both swaying sideways and backwards and forwards. They're dancing at each other, although the boy has to shift his grip on his sea lions to cover both ears because the bird is so delighted he's screeching at the top of his lungs. It's loud, says the boy. That's because he's happy, I say. He likes dancing with you. And then after a few minutes, I tell him that I like his sea lions very much. He frowns. Lots of people think they are seals. But of course they're sea lions, I said. Yes, he says. We glory in the importance of accurate classification. His parents come into the room. They have decided the house is too small for them and their son. His mother says, come on, Antek, we are going now. Then, suddenly, one of the most beautiful moments of human-animal interaction I have ever seen. Antek nods his head gravely at the parrot, and the parrot makes a deep, courteous bow in return. A minute later, I hear the front door open, and I can hear clicking that I suspect might be the collision of sea lion noses. And then Anton makes an announcement. I am going to sleep in the room with the parrot when we live here, he says. Such hard words, uttered with such certainty in the hall. I see both of my autistic children in this story. My daughter who loves animals and whose first word was woof. And my son who carried his toy C-3PO doll, from Star Wars. He carried C-3PO everywhere he went. To me, this is a beautiful story. I love the respect that MacDonald shows toward the young boy and her acceptance of him just as he is. I am grateful to MacDonald for sharing this important message of acceptance and inclusion. I realized recently that I'm a storyteller by trade. I'm constantly thinking about how to tell the story of biology to my students. Which pieces of the story do I tell? Which pieces do I leave out? How do I weave together the story to support understanding, to help students draw connections? Just 2 days ago, on Friday, I returned to my school building for the first time after a year of teaching remotely. It was amazing to be in a classroom with students that I had gotten to know only in a virtual space. My students asked great questions, more questions than they asked during months of online instruction. When my last class arrived in the afternoon, they had already heard that I am tall, and they were making bets on my height. I'm so eager to continue to learn about my students in the remaining weeks of class. And again, I feel a sense of emergence. Recently, I became interested in phenology, the study of the annual events in the lives of plants and animals. And I asked each of my 16-year-old students to adopt a tree and document the blossoming of its flowers and the emergence of its leaves. Never having done a detailed observation of the phenophases of a tree before, and wanting to support my students, I headed out into my neighborhood with my cell phone in hand and adopted some trees to observe. I walked a regular route in the neighborhood, checking in on my trees almost daily. Many of my adopted trees are on the UUCR campus, and I have loved watching spring unfold at UUCR. It has been amazing to observe the bursting of buds, the unfolding of blossoms and leaves. Many of the trees I observed were a mystery to me. I didn't know who they were, to what species they belonged. The trees were telling me their stories emerging with the progression of spring and the unfolding of their signature flowers and leaves. I've been able to identify some of my trees, but not all, and it doesn't really matter if I know their classification. They have become my friends, and I feel like I have been emerging along with my trees. Please join me now in singing our closing song, Come Sing a Song with Me.